Chapter 437. The sudden change made me completely dumbfounded. I wasn't the only one. The other winners of the competition were also stunned. They turned their heads to look at the internal conflict between the elders. They didn't know what to do. Not long after, the besieged corpse sect elder was completely outnumbered and was beheaded. His corpse fell to the ground, and his corpse puppet also fell to the ground after its master died. The two people who attacked turned to look at the dumbfounded Lin Shui and unhesitatingly took out their magic tools. I couldn't bear to do it, but the current situation was strange, and Lin Shui wasn't someone who cared too much about me. After thinking for a while, I stood still and remained vigilant. I was prepared to summon the snake spirit and Tong Tong at any time. As the two of them attacked Lin Shui, the corpse puppet standing beside her suddenly let out a roar and reached out to grab Lin Shui. Her body turned into a streak of purple light and flew toward the entrance of the cave they had come from. Her speed could be said to be peerless. Before anyone could react, her figure had already disappeared from the entrance of the cave. When she used the purple Chin corpse sect to spy on the sacrificial evil spirit, I knew that she wasn't ordinary, but I didn't think that she would have such a divine ability. The two people still wanted to chase after her, but Su Ying-xiu, who was standing not far from me, suddenly called out, "Two senior brothers, don't chase after her. The passage has already been opened. There's less than half an hour before that old monster awakens. We can't waste time chasing after her. That girl won't be able to cause any trouble. It's more important for us to quickly go in and set up the formation." After saying that, he didn't wait for the two to answer and turned his head to Jiang Dongcheng, who was standing in the distance, and said, "Little junior brother, you also came with us. You don't need to panic. The three of us are your senior brothers from the same sect. Master has already told us about your news. The three of us have been in the corpse sect for at least 30 years. You might have some doubts about our identities, but you should know about our sect's keepsakes." After hearing his words, I was completely dumbfounded. This Su Ying-xiu and the two elders of the Corpsine sect were all Jiang Dongqing's senior brothers? In other words, they were also the disciples of the old leader? How was this possible? Jiang Dongqing's reaction was about the same as mine. He stood there with his eyes wide open. His mouth opened for a long time, but he couldn't say a word. Su Ying-xiu nodded towards the other two elders before the three of them simultaneously took out a folding fan and threw it in front of them. Following that, I saw an even more inconceivable scene. The moment the folding fan left his hand, it transformed into a lonely mound. There was no tombstone on the mound, only scattered yellow weeds covering it. It looked desolate and dilapidated. I couldn't be more familiar with this map of Lonely Tomb's lone grave. My square heaven fan is the magical artifact that the old president gave me. When I use it, it transforms exactly the same map of Lonely Tomb's lone grave. Su Ying-xiu said that this was their sect's token. What did that mean? According to what he said, I'm also a member of his sect. I'm also a disciple of the old leader. My mind was in a mess. On the other side, Jiang Dongqing's eyes lit up. He also took out a folding fan, but he didn't take out this magical artifact. Instead, he quickly walked over and excitedly said to Su Ying-xiu, "Elder Su, no, senior martial brother, Master told me that I have 5 people from the same sect. There are 3 senior martial brothers above me. Eldest senior martial brother is surnamed Chun and is a bookworm. Second senior martial brother is surnamed Su and is a destitute butcher. Third senior martial brother is surnamed Zhuge and is a drunkard who loves wine as much as his life. You are my second senior martial brother?" Just as he finished speaking, and before Su Ying-xiu could reply, one of the 2 corpse sect elders standing behind him laughed loudly. Ha ha, master is right. I, your father, am a drunkard who loves wine as much as my life. Ha ha. When second senior Marshall brother was brought back by master, he was indeed a destitute butcher. Eldest senior Marshall brother. Eldest senior Marshall brother is a bookworm who can't even fart after being beaten 3 times, but he is also a scholar. Ha ha, junior Marshall brother, what did master say about you? Jiang Dongqing embarrassedly smiled and said, Master said I'm a 1 in 10,000 genius. Ha 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 ha. Just as he finished speaking, Su Yingxiu and the others all burst into laughter. After a long time, Su Yingxiu stopped laughing and said, Master is really biased. If we're not bookworms, then we're drunkards, but you're a genius. Ha ha. Since master said that, then you really are a 1 in 10,000 genius. Jiang Dongqing looked like he didn't know what to say. He awkwardly laughed for a while before suddenly withdrawing his smile and asking, That's right, second senior Marshall brother, there is something I have to tell you. Before, I didn't know your identity. Su Wei was killed by me. At that time, he inexplicably attacked me. I didn't know what to do, so, Su Wei. Su Yingxiu interrupted him and shook his head. He isn't my son. He's just an orphan that I brought back from the outside. I gave him a name and raised him as my son, but that was just to hide my identity. There's no need to mention him anymore. After saying that with a slightly regretful tone, Su Yingxiu immediately pushed this matter to the side and continued to ask, Jiang Dongqing, you just said that you have 5 fellow disciples. From the looks of it, besides you, Master also accepted 2 other disciples? Who are those 2 junior Marshall brothers? Jiang Dongqing let out a sigh of relief. When he heard Su Yingxiu's question, a smile appeared on his face again. He turned his gaze and looked at me. Ha! Master accepted 2 other disciples. One of them usually calls him grandparent and grandchild. She's not a junior Marshall brother, but a junior Marshall sister. Her name is Yi Pianpian, a famous beauty in our metaphysics society. Yi Pianpian? Su Yingxiu shook his head. This girl. I know her. Let's not talk about her for now. Let's talk about the other junior Marshall brother. Su Yingxiu's reaction was a bit strange, but Jiang Dongqing didn't care about it because he was too excited. The smile on his face became even wider. He pointed at me and said, The other junior apprentice brother is right beside senior apprentice brother. Ha ha. Su Yingxiu was stunned. Then he followed his gaze and turned his head. After staring at me, he suddenly frowned. Him. Jiang Dongqing nodded with a smile. That's right. It's him. Master's last disciple. Su Yingxiu wasn't as close to Jiang Dongqing as before. He frowned and stared at me. After a moment of silence, he finally said, Wang Lin. I know your name isn't Wang Lin. You used a technique to hide your appearance so I could see through it. However, even though I know that there's something strange about you, I can't see any clues. Who are you? Are you that Zhou Yi that was chased by Dragon Tiger Mountain? I stood at the same spot for a long time and gradually recovered from the shock. However, looking at Su Yingxiu and the others in front of me, it was difficult for me to feel close to them like I did to Jiang Dongqing. After Su Yingxiu asked so many questions, I pondered for a moment before nodding and saying, I'm Zhou Yi. I also have the sect token you mentioned, but the old president, I haven't met him, nor have I taken him as my master. Su Yingxiu shook his head. Since you have the sect's keepsake, you are naturally from the same sect. Zhou Yi. Although Master has not told me about you, since you have the sect's keepsake and have appeared here at this time, it must be Master's arrangement. His words made me a bit confused. My appearance here was arranged by the old president. I thought about it. There were many reasons that led me to the corpse insect. How could it be arranged by the old president? How was this possible? Without waiting for me to understand, Su Ingtsu let out a breath, turned around, and said to everyone in a clear voice, "Master has painstakingly arranged for so many years. Everything was for today. Our martial arts and even our lives were given to us by Master. Today, we must complete Master's order. Eldest, senior brother, and junior brothers, follow me in." After saying that, he turned around and casually waved his hand. Chapter 438. At this moment, although the situation in the Tianyin cave had changed greatly, my strength wasn't affected. No matter what the old president arranged for these people to do, it was fine as long as they didn't hinder me. Of course, I wasn't an ungrateful person. The old president had helped me before, and the purpose of joining them conflicted with mine. If I could retreat, I would try my best to give in. I would just take one step at a time. As everyone walked into the cave, I looked up. The situation in the cave was the same as the last time I saw it. In the huge cave, a huge corpse floated in the middle. When I saw it last time, I only felt that the corpse was huge, but I didn't feel anything directly. But this time, I couldn't help but compare Xiao Jin's body with it. I found that this corpse was actually a bit bigger than Xiao Jin's body. So far, I had only seen Tai Sui with such a huge body, but I couldn't determine that this giant corpse was Tai Sui. Because of this, there had to be other evidence. This was the second time I saw this giant corpse, but it was obviously the first time that Su Ingtsu, Jiang Dongcheng, and the others had seen such a strange situation. They were all stunned on the spot, looking up at the giant corpse and the purple plant on it in disbelief. After half a minute, they finally came back to their senses. Su Ingtsu was the first to speak. He sighed as he pointed at the giant corpse and said, "This should be the heavens corpse that Master mentioned. I'll have to trouble Big Shixiao to be on guard here. Third Shitty, Little Shitty, and Zhou Yi, follow me." After saying that, he didn't stop and walked towards the giant corpse. When I heard that, I was stunned. It was normal for him to give orders to his fellow disciples, but why was he ordering me around so directly? It was fine if he treated me as his shitty, but from the way he called me, I could tell that he didn't treat me as his shitty. After hesitating for a moment, I still followed him. No matter if Su Ingtsu called me or not, I had to go to the giant corpse to check it out. Halfway there, Jiang Dongcheng came over to me and said to me with a smile, "Little Shitty, since you have the square sky fan, the mission that Master arranged for you to come here must be the same as ours. Why didn't you tell me directly last time?" Mission? I shook my head. I told you that I have never met the old president. He has never given me any missions either. The smile on Jiang Dongqing's face disappeared, and he asked suspiciously, "How is this possible? Master arranged for us to hide our names in the corpse sect and stay there for several years or even decades. Our goal was to eliminate the ancestor of the corpse sect, and this Feng Tian fan is the key to eliminating the ancestor. Master didn't even give you a mission and directly gave you the Feng Tian fan? Master isn't that muddle-headed. I was bewildered. Their goal was to kill the old ancestor. Then he let me go alone, so the eyes of all the forces must have focused on me. Then I ran all the way. If he knew everything about me, then it wasn't impossible for him to predict that I would come to the corpse sect. The more I thought about it, the more scared I became, and the more I felt that it was possible. But even if it was the truth, there was still one thing I didn't understand. The old president had done so much to cultivate so many outstanding disciples that outsiders didn't know about. He had been planning this for many years, and he had finally forced me to come here. So many years of hard work and planning, and the final goal was to kill the corpse sect's ancestor. What kind of grudge was there between them? If there really was such a deep blood feud, why didn't he come in person? I didn't know how his cultivation was compared to the corpse's sex ancestor, but he was much stronger than us. Wouldn't he be more confident in doing these things himself? I couldn't understand these questions, so I wanted to ask Jiang Dongqing. But at this time, we had already walked under the giant corpse. Su Yingqiu looked up at the giant corpse and immediately said, "There is a square mark on this heavenly Tao corpse's arms and legs. Do you see it?" According to what he said, I looked up and found that there was a symmetrical mark on the 2 upper arms and 2 thighs of the giant corpse. The shape was about a flat gray square, and it was very clear on the skin that was completely covered by the purple and blue plants. After we found the mark, Su Yingqiu said, "I'll be responsible for the left arm. Third brother, you'll be responsible for the right arm. Junior brother, you'll be responsible for the left leg. And Zhou Yi, you'll be responsible for the right leg. In about a minute, that old thing will come out from these 4 directions. Once that old thing appears, we will simultaneously activate the square sky fan and use the lonely grave to suppress him. You understand?" Not only did I not understand, I was completely confused. He said that the old thing was the ancestor. Why did he want to suppress him from 4 directions? And I was very clear about the power of the square sky fan, not to mention dealing with the ancestor. Even if he used the 4 square sky fans to deal with me, I would still be able to easily deal with him. Could he suppress the ancestor with just the 4 square sky fans? My heart was full of questions, so I didn't have time to ask them. Su Yingqiu quickly shouted, "He's coming out. Everyone be on guard." I immediately swallowed my words and quickly became alert. Like the 3 of them, I held the square sky fan in my hand and waited with rapt attention. Almost in an instant, the purple and blue plants on the giant corpse's body suddenly trembled. The giant corpse was originally shrinking along with the plants, so this change was even greater. After about 3 or 4 times, the 4 marks on the giant corpse's arms and legs suddenly exploded with a bang. There was no blood or flesh scattered, but 4 small cauldrons flew out of the 4 marks. Seeing this, my eyes opened wide. These 4 small cauldrons were exactly the same as the 2 cauldrons I had seen in Meizhou and Guangzhou. Before I could react, the small cauldrons suddenly emitted a large amount of thick black smoke. It was a type of extremely thick yin energy. Accompanied by this yin energy were 4 corpses that emerged out of thin air. What was even stranger was that the 4 corpses looked exactly the same. Could it be that this corpse was the ancestor? Su Yingqiu didn't give me time to think. He suddenly shouted, "Now, do it." As soon as he said that, the square sky fan in his hand disappeared. A picture of a lonely grave appeared out of thin air, directly suppressing the corpse in his left arm. Chapter 439. When the 4 paintings appeared, the 4 corpses floating in the air seemed to sense something. Their bodies trembled crazily. Unfortunately, the black mist surrounding them seemed to have a terrifying suction force. No matter how much they struggled, their bodies were still wrapped in the black mist and couldn't budge an inch. They couldn't move, but the 4 paintings were extremely fast. Under our control, they quickly moved towards the 4 corpses to suppress them. Based on my past experience, after the lone grave in the square sky fan appears, I must activate the wild grass on the lone grave and make it entangle and control the enemy. Only then will I be able to achieve the best results. At this moment, I was doing the same thing. I crazily circulated the Tao Qi in my body and sent it towards the weeds on the graves. However, the strange thing was that no matter how much Tao Qi I sent, the weeds on the graves didn't move at all. It was completely different from before. I was surprised and thought that there was something wrong with my heavenly fan. However, when I looked around, I saw that the other three's situation was similar to mine. There was no sign of weeds growing crazily. There were only 4 large graves that were falling towards the 4 corpses. Su Ying-Xiu didn't say anything. It seemed that this wasn't a big problem, so I didn't think too much about it. I just stared at the corpses in front of me. Soon, the 4 graves came crashing down and covered the 4 corpses at practically the same time. Because the graves were illusory, they didn't stop after pressing down on the 4 corpses. Instead, they slowly pressed down until the 4 corpses were completely covered. The entire process was very fast. From the moment we activated the heavenly fan until now, only 10 seconds had passed. I didn't dare to believe it. Were these 4 corpses really the corpse sex ancestor? How could they be so easily dealt with by us? Although Su Ying-Xiu and the others were arranged here by the old president to deal with this old ancestor, and that square heaven fan was very likely to be specially used to deal with this old ancestor, but even so, to be able to deal with him in a short 10 seconds seemed like child's play. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't the only one who couldn't believe it. I lifted my head to look at Su Ying-Xiu and the others. Their expressions weren't much different from mine. 2 minutes passed, and the 4 corpses in the lonely grave map didn't move. I exhaled and was about to turn to ask Su Ying-Xiu about the situation. However, right at this moment, something strange happened. Suddenly, a low and deep voice resounded in the Tianyin cave, which had been abnormally quiet. This sound was obviously a human's. It sounded like someone was chanting. The 4 of us slightly paled and turned to look around to find the source of the sound. However, we quickly withdrew our gazes because the 4 graves in front of us had also changed. I didn't know when the 4 graves had started to emit black smoke. When we first noticed it, the smoke was very faint. However, after a few seconds, it thickened. It reminded me of the smoke that had covered the 4 corpses. I couldn't help but think of the black smoke that had shrouded the 4 corpses. But after a few seconds, the smoke thickened. It reminded me of the black smoke that had covered the 4 corpses. But now, the black smoke suddenly came out on its own. Then, did something happen to the 4 corpses? As soon as I had this thought, I saw the bottom of the grave in front of me crack open, revealing a big hole. Before I could react, the corpses that had been wrapped inside the grave crawled out of the hole. Not only that, but the corpses that had just crawled out had changed a lot. Previously, the corpse had been floating in the air. However, after escaping from the lone grave, the corpse stood upright in midair. Its eyes, which were originally closed, had opened at some point in time. I lifted my head and looked at the corpse. Then I was shaken. There was a saying that said, "Close your eyes and you die. Open your eyes and you live." The eyes were where the spirit energy of a living creature was stored. They were also the place where vitality was the strongest. However, when the corpse in front of me opened his eyes, I didn't feel that he had come back to life. Quite the contrary, his eyes were dim and yellow, as if they had been decaying for a long time. This feeling was like looking at a piece of toilet paper that had been decaying for tens of thousands of years. If the wind blew, it would shatter and turn it into ashes. Apart from the strange gaze, the corpse's mouth was still slightly open. The low moan that seemed to appear out of nowhere just now came from his mouth. At first glance, it sounded like he was mumbling. However, as I was staring at his lips from a close distance, I gradually understood. The corpse in front of me seemed to be mumbling a word, but I couldn't tell what it was. It sounded like King or Buzz. What is it? A spell? Did this corpse use some kind of Taoist technique? I was cautious and kept my eyes on the surroundings. At the same time, I was ready to call the eyes and the snake spirit. I didn't know if the evil sacrificial spirit saw my strange expression, but it suddenly jumped in front of me. It gazed at the corpse and frowned. I didn't know what it was thinking. It was Su Yingxiu's team's goal to subdue this ancestor. I was just helping them. These 4 corpses were extremely strange. If it wasn't necessary, I didn't want to fight them. I hurried to call the evil sacrificial spirit and asked him to retreat. However, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't seem to hear me. No matter how hard I called him, he didn't move an inch. I was worried. Su Yingxiu, facing the corpse, was chanting a syllable similar to the word zhou. The huge drunkard, facing the corpse, was chanting a wu syllable. Jiang Dongcheng, facing the corpse, was chanting a zheng syllable. When I first heard them, I didn't feel anything. But after hearing all 4 voices, my heart was shaken. Zhou wu zheng wang. Zhou wu zheng wang. Zhou wu zheng wang. At that moment, I remembered that on the Yellow Crown Mountain in Kaifeng, when Zhenren Guan asked the fatty to help me suppress the true dragon vein in the jade bracelet, he gave me a note in the wooden box containing the 5 emperor's coins. There was a paragraph written on that note. Zhou, Wu, Zheng, Wang are all absurd. Barren tomb, flesh mound, endless scriptures. Zhou, Wu, Zheng, Wang. I thought that this was a sentence in the opening of the 100 family names, but I didn't expect to hear it again from the 4 corpses in the Yin corpse sect. Could it be that the purpose of Zhenren Guan's note was to warn me about today's matter? Chapter 440. Zhou, Wu, Zheng, and King are all absurd. Barren tomb, flesh mound, endless Taoist scripture. These 4 sentences of 16 words were not difficult to understand. However, the specific meaning of the sentence could not be guessed. Zhou, Wu, Zheng, and King referred to the 4 corpses in front of me. I didn't need to think too deeply about the words barren tomb, but did it refer to the solitary tomb in the sky fan? What did flesh mound mean? The most important thing was the last 4 words, endless Taoist scripture. Could it be that there was some kind of magical treasure in this heavenly Yin cave? As I was thinking about this, the black tombstone with the old president's name and the 4 solitary tombstones all moved toward the 4 corpses. As the distance between the tombstones and the corpses got closer, the resistance from the tombstones became stronger. Success or failure depends on this. Suppress them for me. Su Yingxiu's words made me wake up. After thinking about it for a bit, I stopped thinking about the words. No matter what, it was best to suppress the 4 corpses in the current situation. I now understand why Su Yingxiu's group of 4 suddenly rioted and killed the elders of the corpse sect. Their goal was to arrive here before the ancestor completely awakened from his slumber and suppress him. The reason why they wanted this time was because the ancestor was too strong. From the process of the battle, Su Yingxiu's group was right to be cautious. Earlier, the ancestor hadn't completely woken up, but he was already able to break free from the solitary tomb. Now, he was even able to fight against the 4 of us. It was obvious that as he became more and more awake, his strength was increasing. If we didn't get rid of him, the consequences would be hard to imagine. I didn't even know if I could survive against this old monster. Of course, I didn't use all of my trump cards. It was fine to help the old president, but it wasn't worth risking my life. Jiang Dongcheng and the others desperately sent their Tao energy into the sky fan. I also did my best to send my Tao energy into the sky fan. However, I didn't use any of my shaman energy as I quietly waited for the situation to develop. At the moment, I was only at the complete glory of knowledge cultivation, just relying on Tao Qi. The difference between me and Su Yingxiu and the others was huge. Under the terrifying power of the tombstone, the graves that the 3 of them summoned were already above the heads of the 3 corpses. The grave in front of me was still a clear distance away from the corpses. While I was hesitating whether I should use my shaman energy or the 9 stars heavenly dipper, the 4 withered corpses moved again. Their low cries suddenly became louder. Zhou, Wu, Zheng, King. After 4 short and sharp screeches, the 4 withered corpses suddenly emitted a thick black energy. The few lone grave paintings that were about to get close to them were all sent flying. With a majestic aura, they charged towards the 4 of us. I didn't have time to think too much. The shaman energy in my body circulated, and at the same time, I used the 8th step of the 9-star heavenly dipper. Only then did I manage to block this attack. However, I felt a sweetness in my throat, and I couldn't help but spurt out a mouthful of blood. Not only me, I turned to look at Jiang Dongcheng and the others. Although they didn't spurt out blood, their expressions didn't look too good. I was shocked. It seemed that I had underestimated this old monster. This was the first time he had taken the initiative to attack, and I was already heavily injured. Once he fully recovered, I was afraid that we wouldn't be his match. Right when I wanted to retreat, the scholar standing in the front didn't retreat. Instead, he moved forward. The tombstone in his hand had withstood the attack and continued to press downward. As the tombstone got closer, the voices of the 4 withered corpses became more hurried, and a series of short syllables spread out. However, this time, their target was the tombstone, and they didn't implicate the others. Looking at such a scene, I temporarily suppressed my thoughts of retreating and prepared to observe for a while longer. That scholar was really amazing. Just now, the 4 withered corpses were able to force the 4 of us to retreat. But now, the scholar was withstanding the continuous roars of the 4 withered corpses and didn't have any intention of retreating. However, the 4 withered corpses weren't easy to deal with. The lower the tombstone went, the greater the resistance. When it was about 3 feet from the heads of the 4 corpses, no matter how much the scholar urged, he couldn't move it any further. Hee. The scholar suddenly laughed and didn't continue to urge the tombstone. Instead, he suddenly turned around and looked at us, who were standing behind him. He suddenly said, Junior brother, teachers for corpses must have survived the wrath of the heavens. Just relying on the barren burial mound painting won't be enough. I will suppress them while you guys use all your strength to activate the barren burial mound painting. As long as you can suppress them in the barren burial mound painting for 15 minutes, they won't be able to escape. This is the first time I've heard this scholar speak. His voice was gentle and clear like a spring breeze. However, after he finished speaking, Su Yingxiu and the others' expressions changed, especially Su Yingxiu. His expression darkened, and he cried out involuntarily, Eldest senior brother, must it be like this? The scholar smiled and replied, We can only do this. With that, he turned around and stared at the tombstone that was only 3 feet away from the 4 corpses. Suddenly, he patted his chest and gave out an incomprehensible sound. Pung. Chapter 441. The clanking sounds of the bodies falling to the ground instantly woke up the silent crowd. Jiang Dongcheng was the first to call out, Eldest martial brother, in a panic. Immediately after, the butcher-like fatty quickly walked over and threw himself onto the scholar's corpse, letting out bursts of sobbing. Even Su Yingxiu, who had always been unsmiling, walked over and knelt next to the scholar's corpse. His eyes were clearly a bit red. I stood to the side and watched this scene. I couldn't help but sigh in my heart. These disciples of the old president had been lurking in the corpse sect for decades. In the end, when they suppressed the ancestor, they didn't hesitate to sacrifice their lives. All of them could be said to be outstanding. To be able to cultivate such disciples, what kind of person was the old president? The first to recover his emotions was Su Yingxiu. After he silently shed tears for a moment, he quickly stood up, wiped his eyes, and said in a low voice, "This time, we Marshall brothers came with the belief that if we don't succeed, we will die." Although eldest senior brother passed away, he also completed the task that Master entrusted to him. Junior brothers, don't be sad. Quickly bring these 4 corpses back to Master. That's the right thing to do. Third junior brother, you take eldest senior brother and youngest junior brother, follow behind. Let's go. After saying that, he turned his head and walked in front of me. He reached out his hand and asked me for the square sky fan. The square sky fan was originally given to me by the old president, so it didn't have much use for me. I hesitated for a moment, but didn't say anything and directly handed the square sky fan to him. Su Yingxiu's attitude was still as cold as ever. After receiving the square sky fan, he didn't say a word to me and walked out of the cave. On the other hand, Jiang Dongqing's expression was a bit awkward. He moved in front of me and helplessly said to me, Zhou Yi, this is the first time I've met second senior brother and the others. I don't know why he is so cold to you. However, Master personally said that you are also his disciple. When you go back and see Master, you can formally acknowledge him as your master. In the future, you will be fellow disciples, and there will be no misunderstandings that can't be solved. He probably still thought that there was some conflict between me and Su Yingxiu, but I knew that I didn't know Su Yingxiu at all. His cold attitude towards me definitely wouldn't be so simple. Also, the old president had been avoiding me all this time. It was obvious that it would be as simple as what he said. If I went back to meet him and perform the ceremony of taking him as my teacher, I would become the old president's disciple. However, I didn't need to mention this to him, so I smiled and nodded. It's fine. Senior Brother Su is probably worried about the sect. You guys go first. I'm quite interested in this giant corpse and want to stay behind to study it. As for the matter of becoming his disciple, I'll find some time to visit the old president after leaving this place. At this moment, Su Yingxiu and Jiang Dongqing had already brought the scholar's corpse to the entrance of the cave. They stopped and waited. Jiang Dongqing also didn't want to linger. He nodded to me and said, "Take care." Afterwards, he also walked towards the entrance of the cave. As soon as he left, I turned around and focused on the giant corpse behind me. Was this giant corpse a living Tai Sui? Also, what was the meaning of Master Guan's prophecy? I still had many questions in my heart. However, I had a feeling that the answer to all of my questions lay in this giant corpse. I lifted my eyes to look at the giant corpse. The giant corpse was still covered in purple plants, but it looked a little different from before. At first, I didn't notice it, but after a few seconds, I realized that the giant corpse wasn't moving anymore. The first time I saw this giant corpse, the purplish-blue plants that covered his body were constantly moving. The giant corpse's body was constantly shrinking and expanding. During this shrinking and expanding process, countless wisps of energy gushed out from the giant corpse and filled the entire corpse sect. At this moment, the giant corpse and the purplish-blue plants on his body were strangely quiet. They didn't move at all. I couldn't help but frown and ponder. I vaguely remembered that when Su Yingxiu and I had just entered the heavenly Yin cave, the purplish-blue plants on the giant corpse's body weren't as quiet as they were now. Could it be that after we lured the corpse sect's ancestor out, something happened to the purplish-blue plants? Just as I was about to take a step forward, I suddenly heard a cry of surprise from behind me. I turned around, but didn't see anyone. However, from the voice, I knew it was Su Yingxiu and his fellow disciples who had just left. Before I could think further, Su Yingxiu and the others rushed back from the only passage leading to the heavenly Yin cave. The 3 of them looked a little frightened. I raised my voice and asked them, "What happened?" Su Yingxiu and the drunkard were still staring at the passage. Jiang Dongqing turned around and said to me while panting, "The passage suddenly collapsed. Gravel fell and blocked the entire passage." I frowned, although I didn't know why the passage collapsed. The three of them had the Heavenly Master cultivation base. When I was only at the acupoint ceiling realm, I was able to break the stone wall to get here. Even if the wall collapsed, it shouldn't have been able to stop them. Before I could ask further, Su Yingxiu and the drunkard turned around and said to Jiang Dongqing, the roots of the purplish-blue plants were dancing in the passage. That's why the gravel collapsed. Moreover, the roots contained a huge force. When they were waving, it wasn't any weaker than a full-force attack from the Heavenly Master. After he said that, I was frightened. It wasn't any weaker than a full-force attack from the Heavenly Master. What kind of power was that? As soon as he finished talking, a loud rumbling sound came from the passage behind them. This time, even the entrance was filled with gravel. It looked like the entire passage was about to collapse. My attention wasn't on the falling boulder, but on the dancing purplish-green plants. It was just as Su Yingxiu had said. The purplish-green plants around the tunnel seemed to have come to life as they shook in all directions. Because they had taken root in the entire mountain wall, it wasn't just the tunnel, but the entire mountain wall was shaking as if it was about to collapse. This mountain wall was supporting the entire Heavenly Yin Cave. If it collapsed, the entire Heavenly Yin Cave would collapse. With my current cultivation base, the collapse of the Heavenly Yin Cave wouldn't affect me much. However, the problem was that the roots of the purplish-blue plants were like a huge net that covered the entire Heavenly Yin Cave. When the roots were waving, each root was equivalent to a full-force attack from the Heavenly Master. Even if I used all my strength, I wouldn't be able to get out. As I thought about it, more and more purplish-blue roots burst out from the mountain wall and filled the sky. In such a dangerous situation, even if I summoned the snake spirit, Tong Tong, and the sacrificial evil spirit, we might not be able to escape. Only by working together with Su Yingxiu and the other Marshall brothers would we have some hope. Just as I was about to call out to them, I glanced around and realized that they were in a daze. Even though they were facing me, their gazes weren't on me, but were instead staring blankly at something behind me. Looking at their dazed gazes, my heart shuddered. Only then did I suddenly remember that the last time I had obtained the Heaven's blood, there seemed to have been a landslide and an earthquake had occurred. This time, the purplish-blue plants had burst again. Could it be? Thinking of this possibility, my body instantly stiffened. I shivered and wanted to turn around. Just as I was turning, I heard a loud roar. As expected, the giant corpse had woken up. The worst-case scenario had happened. I clenched my teeth and turned around to face the other direction. Behind me, the giant corpse was roaring angrily and struggling just like last time. The purplish-blue plants that covered his body had become chains that bound him. As he struggled, they flew in all directions. However, what was different from last time was that the purplish-blue plants weren't able to control him. As he struggled more and more intensely, countless purplish-blue plants burst. There were also some purplish-green plants that were deeply embedded in his skin. He tore them off his body. Chapter 442. Just as I thought, no one would dare to fight against such a terrifying giant corpse. Not long after, Su Yingxiu woke up from his shock. He quickly said to Jiang Dongqing, "And the other two, you two follow me. Since this thing hasn't broken free yet, we might be able to escape. Let's go." After saying that, he took the lead and walked out of the cave. Jiang Dongqing and the others were panicking and followed him without saying anything. After they left, I hesitated. Although I didn't have much hope, there was strength in numbers. If the four of us joined hands, we might be able to escape. I turned around and called the evil sacrificial spirit to follow Jiang Dongcheng. When the four corpses of the corpse insect's ancestor appeared, the evil sacrificial spirit stood there and stared at them. No matter how I called him, he wouldn't come back. However, this time he became obedient and left with me without saying a word. However, from his expression, he was definitely the calmest among us. He didn't seem to be afraid at all. Instead, he had a faint smile on his face. I found it strange, but it wasn't a good time to ask him. I kept my head low as we walked forward, while keeping an eye on the vines that were randomly flying above our heads. Every time these vines shook, they had the power of a heavenly master's attack. Although they were still entangled with the rock wall, it was hard to say when they would break and fall. We ran as fast as we could, and soon we reached the entrance of the cave. The tunnel that connected to the outside world was nowhere to be seen. However, since the entire wall was broken, there were tunnels everywhere. The only thing we had to worry about was the complicated vines. The giant corpse was still struggling, and the vines had broken the wall. After the rocks had collapsed, the vines had formed a giant web. It was easier said than done to pass through this giant web. After stopping for a while, Suing-Xiu turned around and looked at the giant corpse. Then he handed the 4 square sky fans to Jiang Dongcheng and asked the fat drunkard to let Jiang Dongcheng take care of the eldest senior brother's body. After doing all this, he stared at the giant web of vines for a while. Then he turned around and said with a serious expression, "The vines are too dense, so it's hard to judge their trajectory. You guys wait here, old 3, and I will try to cut open a passage. You guys observe the situation. If it goes well, follow us immediately. If it doesn't, we'll come back and think about it." Then he called the fat drunkard and walked side by side toward the giant web of vines. As I looked at Suing-Xiu's back, I couldn't help but admire him. The disciples taught by the old president were all very responsible. Moreover, he mentioned me in his words, and his attitude towards me didn't seem to be as hostile as before. While he was pondering, the two of them had already walked to the vines. With a stomp of their feet, they leaped into the air. Unbeknownst to them, a long sword had appeared in each of their hands. With a sword incantation, the 2 long swords, wrapped in a shocking aura of Taoism, slashed heavily at the huge net of vines in front of them. Although the purplish-green vines were tough, they were completely unable to withstand the attacks of 2 young god celestial masters. Under their slashes, at least a dozen vines in front of them were broken, and a dent appeared in the giant net. When I saw this, I became excited. If the 2 of them could cut through 10 vines, then they could cut through 100. Although the huge vine net was thick, as long as we continued to cut along this indentation, we would be able to force a path out. Suing-Xiu and the fat drunkard obviously had the same idea. After exchanging glances, they didn't say a word and flew forward with the 2 swords in their hands. Just like last time, another 10 vines were cut. The 2 of them took a few steps forward. Jiang Dongcheng's face was also filled with joy. He carried his big senior brother's body and turned to me with a smile. "Zhou-Yi, let's prepare to go over. Fly in the air and wait for second senior brother to cut open the passage. Then we'll rush over as fast as we can." I nodded. Suing-Xiu and the fat drunkard were flying in the air to cut the passage. Jiang Dongcheng and I had to fly up as well. Flying for a short period of time was a technique that could only be mastered by those who had reached the celestial master cultivation. Although I had the power of a celestial master, I didn't have a celestial master technique, so I couldn't do it. However, with the sacrificial evil spirit, he could definitely fly me up. This wasn't a problem. Jiang Dongcheng and I moved together. When we reached the bottom of the huge vine net, Su Yingxiu and the fat drunkard had already slashed for the third time. The effect of this slash was still impressive. It cut many vines in front of us. However, in the process of slashing, one of the vines behind them swung and almost hurt Su Yingxiu. Fortunately, he was agile enough and dodged it. After dodging, it seemed that Su Yingxiu also felt that the passage was about to open. He turned his head and activated his Dao Qi, urging the two of us to hurry up and get ready to break out. Jiang Dongcheng and I naturally didn't hesitate and flew to the depression that Su Yingxiu and the fat drunkard had cut open. However, after going up, I realized that the situation wasn't good. Originally, I thought that the vine was just an accident. However, when we arrived in front of it, we realized that the space that they had cut open had many other vines waving over. Although they hadn't completely blocked the space, they had almost blocked it. After a while, I was afraid that the other vines would completely occupy the space. If that was the case, at least Su Yingxiu and the fat drunkard could get out first. Eventually, he gritted his teeth and turned around to tell me that he wanted me to help him take care of eldest senior brother. He wanted to go there and try to save Su Yingxiu and Su Yingxiu. He also said that if something went wrong, if I had the chance, I must send Fang Tianshan and eldest senior brother's remains to the old president. He had made up his mind to die. I wanted to persuade him, but he didn't wait for my answer. He directly dashed forward and crazily hacked the vines with his long sword. I hesitated. The giant corpse was about to wake up. If I couldn't find a way to escape, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to escape death. Should I go with Jiang Dongcheng to find a way to meet Su Yingxiu and the fat drunkard? Although my power wasn't good, with the help of the evil sacrificial spirit, the snake spirit, and Tong Tong, it would be much more efficient than Jiang Dongcheng. Perhaps I could meet Su Yingxiu and the fat drunkard. As soon as this thought popped up in my head, before I could take a step forward, I heard a fierce roar behind me. Right after that, all the purple-blue vines in the Tianin cave seemed to go crazy. Their shaking frequency was much higher than before. Even the rocks on the top of the cave cracked and fell. The falling rocks weren't able to harm me, but the frantically waving vines brought about an even greater danger. Not only were Su Yingxiu and Jiang Dongcheng trapped in the vines, even Jiang Dongcheng, who was standing in front of me, was struck by a vine on his shoulder. His body swayed, and he fell towards the ground. In the process of falling, he spat out a mouthful of blood. I didn't have time to think, and asked the evil sacrificial spirit to take me there. The evil sacrificial spirit was extremely fast. It was even faster than Jiang Dongcheng's falling speed. Not waiting for him to hit the ground, the evil sacrificial spirit grabbed his body and brought him to the ground. When we reached the surface, I first dragged Jiang Dongcheng and eldest Marshall brothers' bodies to a place where there weren't any falling rocks. Only then did I have time to check on Jiang Dongcheng's injuries. There was a deep cut on his shoulder. His clothes were torn, and his skin and muscles were torn. A lot of blood was gushing out. I couldn't help but be frightened. As a cultivator, as his cultivation base increased, his body's toughness would also increase. For example, when the rocks hit my body, I didn't have any reaction. They bounced off my body, and I didn't feel any pain at all. I didn't feel any pain. Jiang Dongcheng had a heavenly master cultivation base, and his body was much stronger than mine. However, that vine had hurt him like this. It was really scary. If one vine was like this, then what about Su Yingxiu and eldest senior brother, who were trapped in the vines? Jiang Dongcheng's face was pale, but he didn't faint. It seemed his internal organs were also affected. After violently coughing a few times, he grabbed my hand and weakly said, "Quickly, go and see how second senior brother and the others are doing." I remained silent and didn't say anything. Jiang Dongcheng became even more impatient. Disregarding his injuries, he pulled my arm and said with a pleading tone, "After all, I still had some feelings for him." After pondering for a while, I couldn't bear to refuse him. I clenched my teeth and prepared to go and see the situation. However, right at that moment, the entire ceiling of the cave exploded. Countless broken rocks rolled down. Although I wasn't afraid of broken rocks, I was forced to stop. I called the evil sacrificial spirit to protect Jiang Dongcheng and eldest senior brother's bodies. After all the rocks had fallen, I dragged Jiang Dongcheng out of the rubble. At this moment, there was no longer a mountain wall above the cave. The light from the outside penetrated through the dense purple-blue vines and shone into the secret area of the corpse insect for the first time. My attention wasn't on the top of the cave. Instead, I raised my head to look at where Su Yingqiu and eldest senior brother were. When the rocks fell, I clearly felt the aura of the Heavenly Master Seal. If I wasn't mistaken, Su Yingqiu and eldest senior brother had already used the Heavenly Master Seal, their final trump card. Although Su Yingqiu's attitude towards me had been cold, I couldn't help but feel a bit of sorrow in my heart. However, this sorrow didn't last for long. I soon discovered another fact. The roars that had been lingering in my ears had disappeared, and the surroundings were frighteningly quiet. What happened? Why did the giant corpse suddenly calm down? I had a strong feeling of uneasiness in my heart, so I braced myself and turned around to look. The giant corpse was still standing in the same place, but his floating posture had changed. At this moment, he was quietly standing on the ground, and the countless purple-blue vines on his body had disappeared. Only a thick purple plant that looked like a root was stuck in his chest. It seemed that the root of the purple-blue vine had been planted in his body. The giant corpse's hands were placed on the thick root. From his posture, it was clear that he was trying to pull it out. Inch by inch, the giant corpse pulled out the purple vine's root from his chest. Although he didn't roar or show any expression on his face, I felt my heart go numb. I didn't know what kind of pain he was enduring at this moment. The more terrifying the pain, the more furious he would be after he pulled it out. Eventually, the purple root was pulled out from the giant corpse's chest along with a black ball-shaped object. Then, an unprecedented deep roar filled the entire cave. Even with my cultivation, I felt a sharp pain in my eardrums. It was strange that after the evil sacrificial spirit roared, the giant corpse seemed to understand something. His face changed, and the crazed look in his eyes disappeared. His bright eyes gazed at the evil sacrificial spirit. After a long moment of silence, he suddenly roared like thunder. Who are you?" Hearing his voice, I was shocked. This giant corpse could talk. Compared to the giant corpse, the evil sacrificial spirit's body was extremely small. I didn't know how strong the evil sacrificial spirit was when he was at his peak, but right now his cultivation base was much lower than the giant corpse's. However, facing the giant corpse, he looked arrogant. He snorted and raised his right hand in front of his chest. A black ball of light appeared in his palm. "It's the same power. Don't you recognize it?" After listening to the evil sacrificial spirit, the giant corpse was even more puzzled. After a few seconds of silence, his thunderous voice arose again. This time he asked again, "Who are you?" The evil sacrificial spirit's face was cold. He put away the black ball of light in his palm and turned around. He pointed at me and said, "You don't need to know who I am. You just need to know who he is." Following the evil sacrificial spirit's movement, The giant corpse's eyes turned to me. This time, his eyes didn't have any crazed or hateful look. There was only suspicion and suspicion. He looked at me in silence for a few minutes. Is it him? No, it can't be. After a moment of silence, the giant corpse suddenly faced the sky and roared crazily. Then he lowered his head and looked at the evil sacrificial spirit. Then he looked at me and said, I don't have much time. You guys wait for me here. Then he turned around and left us, heading toward the Een Energy Passage. The heavenly Een Cave was really high, but the Een Energy Passage was only around 10 meters high. It was impossible for the giant corpse to pass through. However, he had used his great strength to smash the top of the cave and create a passage made of crushed stones. The stone wall that separated the Een Energy Passage and the 4 caves and 8 halls of the corpse sect also collapsed. After the giant corpse passed through the passage, he swung his arm. I saw the buildings in the flying zombie cave not far from us turn into ruins. The cave that extended in all directions had been flattened by the giant corpse, turning it into a huge open valley. Originally, due to the mountain wall's obstruction, I couldn't see far from here. But now, in this vast ruin, my eyes could follow the giant corpse's body. After the flying zombie cave was completely destroyed, the giant corpse continued to move forward and arrived at the purple zombie cave. Just like before, he swung his arm, and the purple zombie cave was completely destroyed. But what was different from before was that the elders in the flying zombie cave had already died, so there was no one left. However, there were many disciples in the purple zombie cave, following the giant corpse's movements. They were destroyed just like the buildings. Countless broken limbs flew in all directions, and in an instant, the smell of blood soared into the sky. The giant corpse didn't stop and continued to move forward. After the purple zombie cave was the black zombie cave. After the black zombie cave, he didn't let go of the white zombie cave, which was the outermost area. The further we went, the more corpse sect disciples there were. The giant corpse didn't want to let any of them go, and he crushed the entire corpse sect. It wasn't until he reached the edge of his field of vision that the giant corpse finally stopped. However, he didn't immediately turn around. Instead, he reached out with his hand and grabbed a few corpse sect disciples. He casually threw them behind him, and they became part of the broken corpses. He repeated this action several times in a row, forcibly capturing nearly 100 people who had escaped. Then he finally turned around and came back. On the way back, he stretched out his hands and pushed the countless broken corpses on the ground. He looked like a mantis that was rolling a dung ball. The broken corpses piled up as he moved forward, creating a bloody and terrifying scene. There were thousands of corpse sect disciples, but I'm afraid none of them managed to escape this time. As the giant corpse got closer and closer to me, the broken corpses piled up, forming a small mountain that was almost as tall as the giant corpse. There were also some scattered stones. I didn't know what kind of divine power the giant corpse had, but it was still very easy for him to push these things. When he finally returned to the heavenly Een Cave, the pile of corpses was almost as tall as the heavenly Een Cave. It was even taller than the giant corpse. It was like a mountain of corpses and stones. When I raised my head to look at this bloody and terrifying pile of corpses, I recalled the prophecy that Taoist Master Guan had given me. Zhou Wu, Zhang Wang, all of them are absurd. Desolate grave, flesh mound, and endless Taoist scriptures. Previously, I saw the so-called Zhou Wu, Zhang Wang, and the desolate grave in the heavenly fan, but I didn't know what the flesh mound and endless Taoist scriptures were referring to. At this moment, I had an epiphany. Wasn't this pile of corpses a human flesh mound? Chapter 444. I was bewildered as I looked at the absurd scene in front of me. My mind was blank. Ever since I had embarked on the path of cultivation, I had experienced many life and death battles and seen countless corpses. However, I had never seen thousands of corpses piled up together like this. Even the corpse storage hall of the corpse sect didn't have so many corpses. Although cultivators had immortal techniques, they were still human beings. Seeing so many corpses of their own kind, no matter how high their cultivation base was, they couldn't remain indifferent. While I was dumbstruck, the giant corpse hurriedly lifted his feet and stepped into the mountain of flesh. His legs slowly sank into the pile of broken corpses and rocks. Then, half of his body was buried in the rubble. I was puzzled. I could say that he had destroyed the entire corpse sect to vent his anger, but now he was gathering corpses and burying himself in the pile of flesh. I couldn't help but ask the evil sacrificial spirit in front of me, "What is he doing?" The evil sacrificial spirit coldly answered me, "Struggling at death's door." Struggling at death's door? What does that mean? Before I could ask, the giant corpse suddenly roared again. His thick hair suddenly fluttered in the wind and seemed to extend a lot. Then he inserted his hair into the pile of corpses. When I was at the Yellow Spring River, I saw Goldie's hair connected to countless human corpses. The last time I came here, I also saw the giant corpse's hair connected to human corpses. However, this time, I didn't see those corpses. What is he doing now? I asked the evil sacrificial spirit. He shook his head and said, "This is an innate divine ability of the Tai Sui. He can absorb the power of the origin from the corpses. However, he just wants to absorb his own power to prolong his life. Unfortunately, it's all in vain." What is the power of the origin? I asked again, but the evil sacrificial spirit shook his head and didn't answer me directly. "I'll know later." As soon as he finished speaking, the giant corpse suddenly let out a sorrowful cry. The thick hair that was inserted into the pile of corpses retracted. Then the aura of the entire person suddenly changed. There was no longer the feeling of madness and terror from before. Instead, there was a feeling of despair lingering around him. He was buried in the pile of corpses in a daze and was silent for a long time. I turned to look at the evil sacrificial spirit. He had just said that the giant corpse's efforts were futile. Looking at the giant corpse's dispirited face, it seemed he had suffered a great blow. I tried to move my body. The power that had restrained me was gone, and the giant corpse didn't move. I thought for a while and decided to ask the evil sacrificial spirit what I should do next. However, before I could say anything, the evil spirit turned around and said, "Follow me." The giant corpse didn't get too worked up and didn't seem to want to argue with the evil sacrificial spirit any further. Listlessly, he asked, "Why did you help me undo my shackles?" The evil sacrificial spirit shook his head. "We just happened to run into each other. That's all. However, now that you've reached the end of your lifespan, after you die, I'll consume your fleshly body. That should help me recover some of my power. As for the remaining shaman chi in your body, I might as well return it to its essence and give it to him." As he spoke, the evil sacrificial spirit pointed at me. I was stunned, but soon understood. The evil sacrificial spirit seemed to be telling the giant corpse to give me his shaman chi. Furthermore, after he died, the evil sacrificial spirit wanted to consume his fleshly body. I couldn't believe it. Even if the evil sacrificial spirit wanted to consume the giant corpse's body, why would he say that? Furthermore, he wanted the giant corpse to give me his shaman chi. That was preposterous. The evil sacrificial spirit's actions were preposterous, but the giant corpse's actions were even more preposterous. He turned to look at me, and after a moment of silence, he nodded and said, "Very well. Since the heavenly Tao doesn't tolerate the Tai Sui clan, everything must return to its essence. However, I'm afraid my meager power won't be enough to wake him up. A smile finally appeared on the evil sacrificial spirit's face. He nodded and said, "It will be of some help." Then he ignored the giant corpse and turned to me. "Go and sit cross-legged in front of him. He will release his shaman chi for you to absorb. Once you absorb his shaman chi, you will probably reach Heaven Master Realm." I was completely dumbfounded, but when I heard Heaven Master Realm, I was stunned. I asked confusedly, "Heaven Master Realm requires one's mental state to reach a certain level in order to push open the door. Is it really possible to just absorb shaman chi?" The evil sacrificial spirit suddenly looked up at me and smiled. "That door doesn't have to be pushed open. Plus, it's impossible for you to push it open. You can only smash it open." I was shocked. I recalled back to when I'd reached glory of consciousness realm at the back mountain of the Metaphysics Society. In that illusion, I'd heard the voice speaking to me as I faced the river in front of me. "Wisdom can cross the river. Ignorance can cross the river. Sages can cross the river. Bandits can cross the river. Butchers can cross the river. Dogs can cross the river. You can't cross the river." The evil sacrificial spirit had said that I couldn't push open the door. And the voice had also said that I couldn't cross the river. My mind was in a daze as I walked to the giant corpse and sat down. Before I could retract my consciousness, I felt a vast amount of shaman chi enveloping me. Before I could even absorb it, the shaman chi had already squeezed into my body through my limbs. Chapter 445. There was a limit to the human body. When something reached the limit of what it could bear, it would lead to serious consequences, such as a complete collapse of the body. However, at the same time, the potential of the human body was almost limitless. Those who regularly exercised knew that when people exercised, it was very easy for the body to reach its limit. At that time, the body would be abnormally tired and weak. However, after persevering for a while and surpassing this limit, the body would feel as if all of its energy and strength had suddenly returned. This was an example of a person's potential exploding and surpassing the limit. At that moment, I was in the same situation. The endless shaman energy in the surroundings had completely buried me and was crazily gathering in my meridian of the heavens. I had used almost all of my strength to prevent the meridian of the heavens from collapsing. However, the surrounding weapons were much stronger than me. Just as I felt the meridian of the heavens crack inch by inch, and I couldn't bear it anymore, the shaman energy that had squeezed into the meridian of the heavens suddenly shrunk a lot, as though it had instantly disappeared. The pressure that the meridian of the heavens had to bear decreased until I couldn't feel it at all. I was stunned by the sudden situation. After a few seconds, I came back to my senses. The shaman energy didn't disappear, but when it reached the bottom of the vein of heaven, it merged with the enormous shaman energy source stone formed by the 7 stars of knowledge. The sorcerer chi disappeared, but the sorcerer chi source stone grew larger. The shaman aura source stone is the source of the shaman aura in my body. After it is enlarged, it is equivalent to completely absorbing the shaman aura from the outside world and turning it into power that I can use in the future. In other words, a part of the sorcerer chi had been completely absorbed by the nest. Before I could rejoice, the meridian of the sky, which had just become empty, was once again filled with a large amount of shaman energy. The speed at which the shaman energy surged into the meridian of the sky was much faster than the speed at which the shaman chi source stone was absorbing the shaman energy. Hence, the pain from before replayed in my meridian of the sky over and over again. The shaman chi source stone grew bigger and bigger until it occupied half of the bottom of my meridian of the sky. Originally, the shaman chi source stone didn't even occupy 1% of the space at the bottom of the vein of heaven. Now, it's dozens of times bigger than before. Especially with the existence of the Tao Chi Source Stone in the vein of heaven, the changes are even more obvious. The volume of a shaman energy source stone is directly proportional to its power. In other words, the shaman energy in my body is tens of times stronger than before. Previously, my shaman chi cultivation was already at glorious memory great perfection. Now, I have the power of dozens of glorious memory great perfection gathered on me. However, I can clearly feel that I haven't reached the heavenly master realm yet. The most obvious sign of the celestial master realm was to condense the celestial master seal. Of course, the celestial master seal is only something that appears when the Taoist chi condenses into a celestial master. I'm not sure if this thing will appear when the witchcraft chi condenses into a celestial master. Apart from that, becoming a celestial master was a process of being reborn. Although there was only a step between glory of knowledge, great perfection, and celestial master, glory of knowledge was ultimately still immortal, while celestial master was already close to being a half immortal. Therefore, in the process of becoming a celestial master, regardless of whether the celestial master seal has been condensed or not, one will have a feeling in the unseen world. However, I don't feel anything at this moment. After absorbing power that was 10 times that of a perfect state of glorious consciousness, I still hadn't reached the level of a celestial master. This wasn't scary. There was a natural chasm between an earthly master and a celestial master. No matter how difficult it was, it wouldn't be an exaggeration. However, what was scary was that even though I had absorbed so much shaman chi, the shaman chi surrounding me didn't seem to decrease at all. It still enveloped me in an overwhelming manner. It was true that humans could stimulate their potential to fight against their limits, but there was a limit to everything. One's potential was almost limitless, but it was not limitless. However, I didn't have any other choice. I could only bite the bullet and continue. Very quickly, the shaman chi source stone continued to grow in size. From occupying half of the bottom of the vein of heaven to occupying more than half, it almost filled the entire bottom of the vein of heaven. At this moment, I finally had a feeling. It was as though a voice had suddenly appeared in the space in front of me, calling for me to walk over. I didn't move, but I slowly closed my eyes. When my eyes were completely closed, there wasn't any darkness in front of me. Instead, it was clear as though I was standing in the clouds. Thick white mist spread under my feet, and the warm sun shone on everything. At the end of the clouds in the distance, there was a huge door that shone with golden light. The voice that was calling for me seemed to have come from that door. I didn't hesitate at all. I lifted my feet and stepped on the mist, quickly arriving before the huge door. As long as I pushed open this door, I would become a celestial master. I would be reborn and transcend the mortal world. At this moment, my body was filled with limitless power. Although the huge door in front of me was huge, I had a feeling that it couldn't stop me. As long as I wanted to, the door would definitely be pushed open. With endless confidence, I walked forward, raised my hands, and pressed them on the huge door. Just as I had imagined, there was a resistance from the huge door. The resistance was really strong, but compared to the huge power that filled my body, it was nothing. I just used a little bit of strength, and the huge door in front of me had a slit. The door was moving. I was ecstatic. Every cultivator had a dream of becoming a celestial master. My dream of becoming a celestial master was about to come true. Just as I gathered all the strength in my body and prepared to push the door open, I suddenly felt my chest and back heat up. Then 2 shadows shot up into the sky. One was silver black, and it came out from my chest. The other was dark green, and it appeared from my back. I lowered my head to look, and my expression changed drastically. One of the shadows was a Qilin, and the other was a black dragon. They were the two Miaojiang venomous insects that I had planted in my body. Yang Shilong had told me that these two venomous insects were the ancestral venomous insects of Miaojiang. Once they were planted, they would take root in the heart. Usually, they would live in harmony with each other until the person with the venomous insects reached the celestial master realm. Then, the venomous insects would fall off the host's body and be retrieved by the person who planted the venomous insects. When the host died, their cultivation would be taken away by the venomous insects. The person who planted the venomous insects could use the venomous insects to obtain all the host's power. When Yang Shilong had told me this, I had only thought that it was a fantasy. It was still uncertain whether I could become a celestial master in this life, so I didn't care. However, I had never thought that in just a few years I would reach this step. After realizing this problem, my restless heart completely calmed down, and my heart wavered. Was the ancestral venomous insects of Miaojiang really that powerful? If I pushed open the door today and became a celestial master, would I really die and my cultivation would be taken away by the venomous insects? I was hesitant, but after thinking for a long time, I didn't dare to take that step. One had to be cautious when cultivating. Along the way, I had suffered countless hardships, spent countless efforts, and experienced countless life and death situations. I had gone through so many hardships to reach this step, so how could I be careless? Thinking to this point, I took a deep breath. My hands left the huge door, and I simply turned around to leave. Just as I left the huge door, the scenery in front of me changed dramatically. The thick white mist under my feet disappeared, and the warm sun in my surroundings also disappeared. I slowly opened my eyes, and in front of me was still the ruins of the corpse sect. My body was still surrounded by countless amounts of shaman energy, but it didn't forcefully enter my body like before. Although I didn't push open the door, I could feel that I was only one step away from the celestial master realm. As long as I wanted to, I could step over that boundary at any time and become a celestial master. My cultivation was infinitely close to becoming a celestial master, so the shaman energy couldn't cause me any more confusion. I took a deep breath and stood up. Seeing me stand up, the evil sacrificial spirit that wasn't far from me immediately looked at me. After examining me, for a moment, his eyes became doubtful. He opened his mouth and asked, "Why didn't you become a celestial master?" The evil sacrificial spirit's cultivation was astonishing. Perhaps he could give me an answer about the ancestral venomous insect in Miaojiang, but now wasn't a good time to ask about it. After absorbing the shaman energy from the giant corpse, I could feel that the vitality of the giant corpse behind me was rapidly diminishing. It wouldn't be long before he died. Before he died, I had a question in my heart that I wanted to get an answer from him. I shook my head at the evil sacrificial spirit, signaling him to calm down. Then I turned to look at the giant corpse in front of me and asked him in a deep voice, "Do you know how many living Tai Sui there are in this world?" The Tai Sui was the source of shaman energy. Even if I entered the celestial master realm, if I wanted to cultivate in the future, I could only obtain power from the Tai Sui. That was why I had to ask this clearly. The giant corpse's reaction had become very slow. He slowly lowered his head to look at me. After a few seconds of silence, he weakly smiled and said, "Living Tai Sui? My Tai Sui clan is not tolerated by the heavenly Tao. It has long been annihilated. How could there be a living Tai Sui? Even I am just struggling at death's door. I can't be considered alive. There are no living Tai Sui in this world. Impossible. I didn't know about the others, but Xiao Jin was a living example. How could there not be a living Tai Sui?" I kept silent for a while, then continued, "I have seen a living Tai Sui." The giant corpse's voice became weaker. He slowly shook his head and said, "There is no living Tai Sui. Even if I have been struggling at death's door until now, as soon as I see the sun, the heavenly Tao won't tolerate me. I will be killed immediately. If the heavenly Tao doesn't tolerate me, how could I live? Even if you have seen a living Tai Sui, I'm afraid he is dead now. Ha ha. It's time for my Tai Sui clan to die of old age." My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't help but recall Xiao Jin. Why did he leave me all of a sudden? If what the giant corpse said was true, then wouldn't Xiao Jin be? While my mind was in a mess, the giant corpse in front of me couldn't stand it anymore. His big eyes slowly closed, and his mountain-like body slowly fell into the pile of corpses. 10% was enough for the evil sacrificial spirit to recover his cultivation base to that of a young god, celestial master. This power of the Tai Sui was really overbearing. Then the evil sacrificial spirit shook his head and said, "Let's not talk about me first. According to my estimation, the evil sacrificial spirit's power should be enough for you to reach the young god, celestial master." Celestificial spirit thought of my cultivation base more than it. After he stood, and he and said, and I also shook my head. I told him about the venomous insect technique I had and the situation of the 2 ancestral venomous insects in my body. Actually, even if he hadn't asked me, I would have asked him for help. Yang Shilong had told me that the Kirin venomous insect wasn't incurable. I just needed a celestial master to help me get rid of it. The evil sacrificial spirit's cultivation base had surpassed that of a celestial master. Moreover, he was knowledgeable. It was the best thing for him to do. After listening to me, the evil sacrificial spirit frowned and asked, "What's a venomous insect technique?" I was dumbfounded when I heard his question. Not to mention cultivators. Even ordinary people could talk about venomous insects for a long time. How could the evil sacrificial spirit not know about it? I was skeptical and asked him several times. Eventually, I confirmed that the evil sacrificial spirit wasn't joking with me. It wasn't that our definitions of venomous insects were different. It was that he didn't know what it was. I talked and gestured. I told him about the technique that had a strong ethnic aura, including the origin, classification, and forms of venomous insects. After I had been afflicted with the Kirin venomous insect, I had collected a lot of information about venomous insects. I still remembered them. After talking for a long time, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't look like he understood. Instead, he furrowed his brows. I thought he didn't understand, so I wanted to tell him again. However, as soon as I opened my mouth, he interrupted me and shook his head. I know the meaning of venomous insects, but it sounds familiar. Familiar? I didn't understand what the evil sacrificial spirit meant. As I was about to ask, he waved his hand and interrupted me. "If that's the case, you don't have to hurry to become a celestial master. Don't have to hurry." I wanted to tell him and see if he could help me get rid of the 2 venomous insects. After all, the celestial master realm was my dream. However, if there was a chance, I didn't want to drag it out. After listening to him, I was a little worried. I thought he hadn't heard the method I had heard from Yang Shilong, so I told him again. After I had told him, the evil sacrificial spirit shook his head. "We can try to get rid of it, but it's hard to say whether it's a blessing or a curse. You don't have to worry. After I investigate, I will make a decision." I didn't understand what he meant. It's hard to say whether it's a blessing or a curse. Did the old aunt give me some benefits when she cast the venomous insects on me? I thought for a while. At this moment, I had the power of a celestial master. Moreover, the snake spirit and Tong Tong were living in my body. If something happened, the three of us could deal with it. If the three of us couldn't deal with it, even if I became a celestial master, it would be useless. With that thought, I nodded and agreed with the evil sacrificial spirit. I wasn't in a hurry to break through. After we had settled this, I asked the evil sacrificial spirit what he wanted to do next. The relationship between me and the evil sacrificial spirit was very strange. We seemed to be strangers, but at the same time, we were very familiar. He hadn't told me his identity yet, but he was very loyal to me. It could even be said that he obeyed me. Maybe I had some doubts about him at first, but after experiencing so much, I trusted him a lot. I could even say that I relied on him. That was why I took the initiative to ask for his opinion. After hearing my words, the evil sacrificial spirit pondered for a while. Then, he told me that he couldn't store the power of the Tai Sui's body for a long time. He had to digest and absorb it as soon as possible. In addition, he wanted to investigate the 2 venomous insects I had. So, he wanted me to leave for a while and let me do whatever I wanted. I opened my mouth but didn't say anything. At first, I thought that the evil sacrificial spirit had recovered his Yang God celestial master cultivation base. With his knowledge and means, I was afraid that all the Yang God celestial masters in the world wouldn't be his match. With such power, together with the snake spirit, Tong Tong, and we might be able to go to Mount Longhu to ask the celestial master sect for justice. At that time, I was wronged by those celestial masters and was chased all the way. I still hated it and couldn't let it go. If it weren't for the Moe bead and the Corpsine sect, I was afraid that I would have been killed by the celestial master sect. However, at this time, the evil sacrificial spirit was anxious to digest the power, so he wasn't in a hurry. It wouldn't be too late to go to Mount Longhu after he came back. Moreover, even without the evil sacrificial spirit, with my current strength, I wasn't afraid that the people of Mount Longhu would come to find trouble with me. Even if I couldn't defeat the Yang God celestial master, I could easily run away and wouldn't have to worry about my life. Thinking of this, I felt relieved. I turned around and picked up Jiang Dongcheng, who had already passed out, along with the square sky fan in his hand and the body of the scholarly eldest senior brother. Then I left along the path that the Tai Sui giant corpse had created. As for the bodies of Su Yingxiu and the fat drunkard, I originally wanted to collect them. However, after searching for a while, I found that their bodies had already been crushed by the vines. I couldn't find a piece of intact flesh, so I gave up. On the way out, I hadn't even taken a few steps when I heard a ding sound. It seemed that I had kicked something. I quickly looked down and found that it was the 4 small cauldrons that the ancestor of the Corpsine sect had taken when he came out of the Tai Sui giant corpse. I had seen 2 cauldrons like this before. One was in the Meizhou Metaphysics Society, and the other was in the orchard cellar in Shenzhen. I still had the small cauldron that was found in the Meizhou Metaphysics Society, but the one in Shenzhen was taken away by the Public Security Department as evidence. When I first discovered the strange characteristics of these small cauldrons, I had studied them. Later on, I boldly guessed that these small cauldrons were the legendary 9 prefectures cauldrons. Now that I saw 4 similar cauldrons, I didn't want to let them go, so I quickly picked them up. After carefully examining them, I found that these 4 small cauldrons were exactly the same as the Jizhou cauldron. Only the seal characters on them were different. These 4 cauldrons were Shuzhou cauldron, Yangzhou cauldron, Jingzhou cauldron, and Yongzhou cauldron. Since the evil sacrificial spirit was here, I didn't need to make wild guesses. I gave the cauldron to the evil sacrificial spirit and asked him if he knew what it was. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't take it. He just glanced at it and said, "This is a replica of the 9 prefectures cauldron. It originally belonged to you, so you should keep it. If you have a chance in the future, you must find the other cauldrons so that it will be convenient for you to act in the future." His words didn't make sense. However, I was already used to it, so I didn't ask any more questions. I just told him that I had seen 2 of these cauldrons before. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't mind. He just told me to take good care of the 5 cauldrons that I already had and to find the one in the Shenzhen police station. As for the remaining 3 cauldrons, I had to find them if I had a chance. However, I wasn't in a hurry, and there was no need to search for them. From his expression, I could tell that it wasn't a bad thing. I nodded and didn't ask any more questions. I followed him and left the corpse sect. The 800-kilometer-long Taihang Mountains were slightly less majestic, but they weren't lacking in length with the speed of the evil sacrificial spirit. And it took us a long time to walk out of the mountain range where the corpse sect was located. Just as we were about to continue walking along the mountain road, the evil sacrificial spirit suddenly waved his hand, signaling me to stop. Before I could ask anything, I looked up and saw 3 figures floating in the air not far away from us. Looking at their faces, they were the 3 celestial masters from Mount Longhu that had chased us before. I had been in the corpse sect for several months, but I didn't think that they would be so patient and wait until now. Not long after we stopped, the 3 people landed in front of us. The one in front was still the fat celestial master. He stared at me with a smile on his face and said, "I traveled far and wide to find you. Yesterday, there seemed to be an accident in the corpse sect, so I didn't have time to check it out. I didn't expect to meet you here. Zhou-Yi, this time you have nowhere to run, right?" He couldn't suppress the smile on his face, and his fat face almost deformed. However, he definitely didn't know that I couldn't suppress the joy in my heart at this time. I thought that the evil sacrificial spirit was in a hurry to go into seclusion and wouldn't be able to find the people from Mount Longhu to take revenge. However, I didn't think that they would come to me first. Chapter 447. I coldly looked at the fat, great heavenly master and smiled. Since you people from Mount Longhu are so patient, I naturally have nowhere to run. Hee, may I know your name? The fat, great heavenly master wasn't in a hurry to make a move. He nodded. "Fine, I'll let you know. This humble Taoist is Li Longqian, the head of the Eastern Hidden Courtyard of Celestial Master Sihan's mansion." Eastern Hidden Courtyard? It was said that it was the only Tao academy in the Celestial Master's abode. The dean's identity was extraordinary, and he held an extremely important position in the Celestial Master's abode. It was no wonder that the fat Celestial Master was the superior of the other 2 Celestial Masters. As for the name Li Longqian, according to the blood drop generation of the 3 mountains of Jingyi School, he was obviously 1 generation older than Qin Yangting. I nodded. "So it's Li Longqian, the head of the Eastern Hidden Courtyard. No wonder you're so powerful. However, there's something I don't understand. I've already told you everything about what happened in the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty. Why are you still chasing after me these past few months?" This was indeed what puzzled me. There was enmity between me and Mount Longhu, but to them, that woman was more important. Even if they didn't believe me, they should have made preparations in many ways. However, the 3 of them were the ones who chased after me, and the 3 of them were still guarding me. It seemed that they hadn't left this place in the past few months and had placed all their chips on me. When Li Longqian heard what I said, he shook his head and sneered. "My Mount Longhu has its reasons. How can a little thief like you interfere? You only need to know that if my Mount Longhu wants you dead, you must die." What a tyrannical Mount Longhu! When I first met Qin Yangting, the head of the profound altar palace, I had already seen how tyrannical Mount Longhu was. Today, Li Longqian had given me a new understanding. Qin Yangting had only slandered me for secretly learning the technique, but he wanted to take my life without a reason. The anger in my heart surged, but I couldn't help but feel suspicious. From his words, it seemed that he wanted to kill me here and now. Could it be that Mount Longhu no longer wanted to find that woman? Before I could ask further, Li Longqian said, "As for the matter regarding the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty, after you die, we will search your soul. We will find the answer. It is more reliable than your empty words." I suddenly understood. No wonder he wanted to kill me. He wanted to search my soul. No matter what kind of secret technique it was, after the soul search, the soul would definitely be destroyed. What a heavenly master of Longhu Mountain! Not only did he want to take someone's life, he didn't even let go of their soul. I was so angry that I laughed. I mocked, "You're so arrogant." Then it was as if an invisible blade had slashed across his chest. The skinny heavenly master was cut into 2 halves. He didn't even need to use half a move before he died. In just a blink of an eye, Li Longqian's face was filled with shock. His smile disappeared. I stood next to him, but I wasn't surprised at all. I had seen the evil sacrificial spirit's mysterious technique in the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty. At that time, he had uttered 2 syllables in a row to repel the joint attack of more than 10 heavenly masters. Now, he had used the same technique again. Although he had only uttered 1 syllable, his opponent was just an ordinary heavenly master. It was a normal result. The deathly silent atmosphere lasted for half a minute before Li Longqian retracted his gaze from the remains of the skinny heavenly master and turned to look at the evil sacrificial spirit. There was no longer any disdain in his eyes. Instead, there was an intense fear. At the same time, the evil sacrificial spirit's gaze shifted to him. It didn't waste any time and used the same technique, uttering the mysterious syllable again. "She." With the skinny heavenly master as an example, Li Longqian didn't dare to be careless. He quickly took out several silver talismans. With a light rub of his fingers, all the talismans were activated. They formed several layers of colorless glass-like barriers in the air in front of him. As expected of the master of the Eastern Hidden Courtyard, his reaction was extremely fast. After he had done all that, the evil sacrificial spirit's finger had just raised and slashed down diagonally in the air. Just like before, another celestial master standing behind Li Longqian suffered an unexpected calamity, as if an invisible giant blade had slashed past him. From the right side of his neck to the left side of his chest, he was sliced into 2 halves and instantly breathed his last. The layers of defensive talismans in front of Li Longqian didn't have any effect. They were shattered almost instantly, and his whole body was cut in half at the waist. Unlike the other 2, after Li Longqian was cut in half at the waist, his organs flowed all over the ground, but he didn't die immediately. He even crawled a few steps on the ground with his hands. His huge eyes stared at the evil sacrificial spirit, and his mouth moved, but he couldn't make any sound. After a while, his arms went limp, and he finally died. The result was not beyond my expectations, but the process was a little different from what I had imagined. I hadn't fought with Li Longqian, but I could vaguely see that even if his cultivation base hadn't reached the Yang God realm, it wasn't far from it. Who would have thought that when facing the evil sacrificial spirit, he wouldn't be able to fight back? It seemed that my previous guess was right. In the same realm, the evil sacrificial spirit was an invincible existence. Since he had the cultivation base of a Yang God celestial master, no Yang God celestial master was his opponent. If even a young god's celestial master wasn't his opponent, I was afraid that in this world, only the old president or the current heavenly master of Mount Longhu would have the ability to fight against him. As I was thinking about this, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't move at all. It was as if he had casually crushed 2 ants. He lifted his feet and walked around the corpses. Then he urged me to continue our journey. I didn't say anything and followed him. After a long time, we finally walked out of the 1,000-mile-long Taihang mountain range and arrived at Pingding County, which was located at the western entrance of Taihang Mountain. At this place, the evil sacrificial spirit seemed to be unable to suppress the power in his body and hurriedly separated from me. I asked him where he was going to seclusion and how we would meet after he finished his seclusion. However, he shook his head and didn't answer. Let me move around as I please. Once he finishes digesting the power in his body, he will find me. After saying that, he left towards the west and disappeared into the western sky in an instant. Not long after the evil sacrificial spirit left, Jiang Dongcheng also woke up. Although he was seriously injured, he still had the cultivation base of a heavenly master, so he was able to move around without any problems. He hurriedly asked me about what had happened after he had fainted. I didn't hide anything and told him about the deaths of Su Yingxiu and Li Longqian. Jiang Dongcheng was silent for a long time. Then he turned his head and kowtowed 3 times in the direction of the corpse insect. Then he stood up and carried eldest senior brother's body on his back. He picked up the heavenly fan and said goodbye to me. Before he left, he told me to go see grandfather Li when I had time. I didn't know if I should go see the old president, so I didn't give him a formal answer. I just told him that I would try my best to go when I had time. Jiang Dongcheng didn't say anything more. After cupping his hands to thank me, he left. After they all left, I was the only one left. I silently stayed in place and began to think. After this matter, where should I go? I haven't avenged my parents. I haven't resolved the enmity of being hunted down by Mount Longhu, and I haven't been cleared of the crime of killing 18 heavenly masters. However, these things require absolute power. Before meeting the evil sacrificial spirit again, it's useless to think too much. The safety of the fatty was still uncertain. I had promised to find Yi Piampian to investigate the situation, but I hadn't done it yet. Also, I didn't know how the reconstruction of the feng shui metaphysics shop in Guangzhou was going. I also didn't know how Wang Kuen's son, little Wang Li, was doing. These were all things I needed to do. Chapter 448. On the way to Shenangjia, I couldn't help but think about the conversation between the evil sacrificial spirit and the Tai Sui in the Yin Corp sect. What is the power of the origin? What is the mountain and sea realm? I had asked the evil sacrificial spirit these questions on the way, but the answer he gave me was that it wasn't the right time yet. This feeling made me very uncomfortable, just like Nan Gong and the old president. It seemed that everyone around me knew what was going on, except for me. With these complicated thoughts, I didn't talk much on the way. Soon, the car arrived in Hubei. I took another car and went to the Shenangjia scenic area alone. After leaving for half a year and arriving here, I put those annoying things to one side, and my heart was full of happiness. It was probably because of the dangerous journey that I had been running for my life. I was eager to find someone close to me to talk to. That person was probably the closest person to me in this world. Over the years, I didn't have many people close to me. Tong Tong was the first. I had always treated her as my younger sister. The spirit snake was half a friend to me. As for the fatty, he was my friend and also my brother who had grown up together with me. Although the mystery from last time still hadn't been solved, I believed from the bottom of my heart that he wouldn't lie to me. Apart from them, there was only Bai and She was my wife. Although we hadn't seen each other much and hadn't spoken much, she was still the closest person in my heart. Whenever I was happy, she was the one I wanted to share with the most. Whenever I was in trouble, she was the one I wanted to talk to the most. My previous emotional experience was blank, but I knew very well in my heart that this was love. Sometimes I felt that I wasn't a good husband. And I didn't spend much time together. Every time we met, we only stayed for 1 or 2 days. Then, because of various things, we had to leave in a hurry. Fortunately, she was considerate and never complained about anything. But because of this, I felt that I had wronged her. Many times, I had the thought that I wanted to stay with her for a long time. I didn't care about the Heavenly Master, Shaman Chi, or Emperor Ku of the Gao Xian clan. I wanted to throw everything away and stay here with Bai and forever. But every time I thought about this, there was always an obstacle in my heart that I couldn't get rid of. It was the Liu family. I have to avenge my parents' blood feud. Most of the times I left, it was for this reason. But now, the situation seems to be different. In the past, I couldn't see any hope of revenge, so I kept working hard and cultivating until the day I had the strength to overthrow the Liu clan. This time, I already had 1 foot in the Celestial Master realm. I was confident that I could fight anyone in the Liu family with my eyes and the snake spirit. Although I couldn't guarantee that I could wipe out the Liu family, I could at least fight them head-on. Moreover, there was the sacrificial evil spirit. As long as he digested the power, he could crush the entire Liu family with a single finger. Now that I had confidence in my heart, my obsession from before had faded a little. This didn't mean that I didn't want to take revenge, but I was no longer in such a rush. I no longer thought about it day and night. All he had to do was wait for the sacrificial evil spirit to come back and settle everything. At this moment, I wasn't in a rush for revenge, nor was I in a rush for anything else. So, I had to accompany Tao Wu for a few more days. When I reached my destination, it was already dusk. The sky was getting dark. Perhaps it was because I was close to home, but I felt nervous. I stood by the riverside and took a few deep breaths before I calmed down. Just then, a fluorescent light appeared before my eyes. The majestic hall came into view again. Looking at the familiar words Fire God Temple on the board, I eagerly stepped onto the red stone steps and stepped into the hall. The red platform, the red seat, everything was the same as before. This time, Yintong didn't appear. I looked around, and there was no one in the hall. I vaguely remembered that the last time I came here, Yintong told me that he was the ancestor of the Shang dynasty, Shang-Chi. Then he disappeared. However, Tao Wu told me that she had never felt his presence. Just as I was thinking about this, the voice that I had been waiting for a long time entered my ears. The voice was like the sound of nature, making me feel warm. However, I couldn't help but feel nervous and guilty. Of course, I was mostly happy. "Husband, you're here." The one who had spoken was Tao Wu. She was still smiling sweetly and considerate, without a trace of sadness or worry. I turned to look. Tao Wu was still wearing her red wedding dress. She was smiling and her eyes were filled with surprise. "Husband, you'll be back in less than half a year. How was it? Did everything go smoothly outside?" I pretended to be calm. At this moment, the Heavenly Master and the battle of the witchcraft were nothing compared to the smile of my lovely wife. It went smoothly. Everything went smoothly. As I said that, I couldn't help but extend my hand to touch Tao Wu's delicate face. Tao Wu was a little bashful. She lowered her chin slightly, and the light from the fire shone on her face, making her look even more charming. "Did you miss your husband?" With the light from the fire, I could see the fine hair on Tao Wu's face and ears, adding to her charm. Yes, Tao Wu's chin drooped again. Looking at the fairy-like beauty in front of me, I couldn't help but recall what she'd said when I'd left the fire god temple, and she'd taken the initiative to let me lift her veil. Although we've never done the deed of husband and wife, our hearts are connected. Husband, can you lift my veil today? Even now, my heart couldn't help but flutter when I recalled what she'd said. Her bashful look was even more alluring. I couldn't help but want to dote on her, caressing her cheeks. I couldn't help but say emotionally, "Husband missed you too." Then I pressed my lips against hers. Before I'd come, I'd wanted to say a million things to Tao Wu. However, when I saw Tao Wu, all my words disappeared. Perhaps giving my lover a deep kiss was the best thing to say. Tao Wu probably hadn't expected such an intimate action from me. She lowered her chin even more, and her snow-white neck was tinged with pink. Although we'd been husband and wife for a long time, and I didn't reject the deed of husband and wife, I didn't rush to do anything after the kiss. I just looked at her with a burning gaze. Tao Wu was still as shy as a frightened deer. She slightly avoided my hot gaze. After a while, she raised her head to look at me again. Her gaze carried a bit of heartache. Did husband suffer any grievances outside these past few months? You look much more haggard. Although I didn't directly participate in the battle at the corpse sect, I was also affected. My clothes were inevitably torn, and I looked haggard. I quickly shook my head. No, my time outside has been smooth. Let's not talk about that. This time, I plan to stay here for a long time. We'll stay together in this temple. Hearing my words, Tao Wu was slightly stunned. After a while, she muttered, "Staying together for a long time is naturally good, but what? You don't want to?" How could that be possible? Of course I'm willing. Every day, I hope to be with husband for 100 years. Staying in this cave every day, I'm always worried that husband will forget Tao Wu. Tao Wu smiled. There was a hint of melancholy in her voice. My heart slightly ached. This little fool, staying alone in this desolate cave every day. It was really hard on her. Thinking of this, I felt even more tender towards her. I couldn't help but scratch Tao Wu's nose and said, "Fool, you're my wife." Which husband in this world would forget his own wife? In the past few years, I've always been worried about other things, so I neglected you. Now I understand. Although there are other things, it's more important to cherish the people in front of me. You're my wife. I won't let you stay alone in this desolate cave anymore. You can't go out, so I came here to accompany you. Unless it's something necessary, I won't go out. From now on, this will be my home. I wasn't stupid. I could clearly feel that many people had ulterior motives for getting close to me. Only Tao Wu, she wholeheartedly wanted to be good to me. She never thought of asking anything from me. How could I bear to abandon her and go out to pursue those groundless matters? Moreover, after going out for 1,000 miles, although it was a blessing in disguise, my heart was still extremely tired. At this moment, I said these words. On one hand, I felt very guilty towards the woman who was closest to me. On the other hand, I was tired of the mutual deception outside. Rather than racking my brains to survive outside, it was better to return here and live in seclusion. In the eyes of ordinary people, it was only natural for a woman to rely on their husband. However, Tao Wu was overwhelmed by the favor. Her eyes were even slightly misty. Currently, my realm was already close to that of a heavenly master. Adding on the fact that I had cultivated the 8th step of clear insight, my eyesight had become even more powerful. Furthermore, Swan Ni's cultivation seemed to have increased as well. In my eyes, he seemed to be even more solid and real. Previously, I might have had a knot in my heart and always felt that Tao Wu was a ghost bride. However, now that I had experienced so many things, I knew that she was the most important to me. Regardless of whether she was a human or a ghost, it wouldn't change that. Tao Wu was obviously moved. After a brief silence, she grabbed my hand and clasped her fingers tightly. She said, "With husband's words, Tao Wu will have no regrets even if I die." I smiled and pulled Tao Wu into my embrace. Smelling the faint fragrance on her body, I pretended to be angry. "Fool, why are you talking about life and death? We still have a long time in the future." Tao Wu smiled faintly and allowed me to hold her in my embrace. However, she avoided the previous topic and asked, "I can see that husband's cultivation seems to be about to break through to Celestial Master." Celestial Master? I smiled wryly in my heart. Wouldn't I become the dowry of that old witch in Miaojiang? I only reported the good news and didn't report the bad news. It's just a short distance away. The Qilin Gu was one of the two ancestral Gu in Miaojiang. It had the power of the Julie god. I believed that Tao Wu, who was only at the Yin god realm, wouldn't be able to break the Qilin Gu. Moreover, the sacrificial evil spirit would find a way sooner or later. There was no need for me to say it now and make her worry for no reason. Tao Wu smiled and buried her head in my chest. She seemed to be deep in thought. I thought she had noticed something and was about to explain. However, Tao Wu suddenly said with a voice as soft as a mosquito's buzz, "Husband, it's still late. Why don't we go to bed early?" I lowered my head and saw that Tao Wu, who had a shy face, now had a pink tint to her ears. I had slept on the same bed with Tao Wu before. However, it was obvious that she didn't just mean it on the surface when she said to go to bed. Even though I was a beginner, I still understood what was going on. Husband and wife intercourse was part of the human relationship. I was already prepared for it, so I didn't say anything. I bent down and picked her up, returning to her cave residence. Tao Wu's body wasn't any different from an ordinary person's. The next morning, Tao Wu and I both woke up. Currently, my cultivation was close to that of a celestial master. On the path of cultivation, not only did I improve my strength, but I also became more tenacious. There was still a long time in the future. I naturally wouldn't be greedy for a moment of pleasure. After getting up, Tao Wu and I were more indifferent than yesterday. There seemed to be endless words of love between us. We sat there and talked about our experiences after we parted. Unknowingly, another day had passed. Beautiful time always seemed so short. With Tao Wu by my side, staying here for a lifetime would only be a flash. I hugged Tao Wu quietly. I didn't want to let go for even a moment. Chapter 449. Lao AI. I couldn't react in time, so I called out in a daze. When he realized what had happened, he panicked and tried to hug her with all his might. However, he realized that his hands had directly passed through her body. Lao AI had turned into an illusion. Lao AI. Lao AI. This time, my voice was heart-wrenching. I didn't know what had happened, and I didn't dare to believe what was happening in front of me. At that moment, Lao AI's body had turned illusory. Her face was sad, and she reached out her hands like she wanted to grab me, but her body seemed to be pulled from behind, and she couldn't help but retreat. I sat up like I was electrocuted and chased after her with all my might. I wanted to grab her, but she kept retreating and was always just a little faster than me. Lao, AI, don't go. I was just one step away from Sky Master. Although I couldn't fly, my speed was still shocking. Even so, I couldn't catch up to her. Lao AI's face was filled with sadness, and her expression was even more pained than mine. She opened her mouth, and it was obvious that she wanted to say something, but no sound came out. Even her illusory body was fading. What was going on? I definitely wasn't dreaming. My cheeks were hurting because I was moving so fast. However, I couldn't do anything about it. I could only watch as my wife's silhouette moved further and further away, becoming blurry and indistinct. I couldn't help but roar in rage. All the meridians in my body were activated, and the Shaman Chi Source Stone and Tao Energy Source Stone in my body provided me with energy. I was a dual cultivator, and my strength was no weaker than some Sky Masters. However, it was useless. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't catch up to her. I grabbed the jade bracelet and crazily absorbed the power of the true dragon vein and the shaman energy that I had gotten from swallowing the Tai Sui. However, I could never catch up to Lao AI. I could only see the bone-deep helplessness on Lao AI's face. My mind was blank, but I gritted my teeth and used all the power in my body. I had to save Lao AI. I had to save my wife. If a man couldn't even protect the woman he loved, what else could he do? I definitely didn't believe that Lao AI would leave me. The sadness on her face was even thicker than mine. Someone had definitely taken her hostage. No matter who it is, as long as they hurt Lao AI, I will never let them off. Silently activating the power in my body, I clenched my teeth and took the 8th step of the 9-star Heavenly Dipper. Apart from being used in battle, the astral steps was also useful in chasing an enemy. The moment I used the astral steps, my body's functions would be amplified several times. I gathered all of my cultivation under my feet and fiercely stomped on the ground. In a split second, my body shot forward like lightning. With a heavy stomp, even the hard ground of the fire god temple was cracked. After my body shot out, the friction between my feet and the air seemed to be rubbing against each other, and golden light shone in all directions. The golden light was like a pillar of light that spread in all directions and even illuminated the deep and quiet fire god temple. My speed almost broke through the sound barrier, and it was comparable to flying on a sword. But Tao Wu was still less than 10 feet in front of me, and the distance didn't change. I could still see 2 lines of tears and an even more blurry figure. The huge consumption caused beads of sweat to drip down my forehead. Tao Wu looked as if her heart ached, and she desperately wanted to say something, but no matter how she opened her mouth, no sound came out. Perhaps emotions could make people explode, but they couldn't really give people power. Under the continuous consumption, even though I was unwilling, even though I was on the verge of going crazy, in the end, as my strength was exhausted, my speed gradually slowed down. I thought that when I was fast, Tao Wu would be faster, and when I was slow, she would naturally be slower. I didn't expect that Tao Wu's figure didn't slow down, but became even faster. Tao Wu's figure floated towards the main hall and became more and more illusory, until it finally disappeared into the endless darkness. Tao Wu. I let out another mournful scream. Vaguely, I seemed to hear Lao AI saying, "Take care of yourself, husband." I panted heavily and didn't care about the exhaustion on my body. I crazily searched the main hall, but I couldn't even feel a trace of Tao Wu's aura. Where did she go? I didn't give up and looked around again, but I still couldn't find anything. Endless fear surged in my heart. What people were most afraid of wasn't strong power or cruel killing, but the unknown. Even now, I was still at a loss. Why did Tao Wu disappear? What kind of power was controlling everything? After searching every corner of the main hall, I slumped on the ground. Thinking back to the situation just now, I felt more and more helpless. Even if I were to face the sacrificial evil spirit, I would only feel that he was very powerful and wouldn't feel as helpless as when Tao Wu was always one zhang away from me. It was as if it was the will of heaven and earth that didn't allow me to resist. "Father!" Suddenly, a dignified voice sounded from behind me. I didn't know when, but the silver-eyed person had suddenly appeared behind me. A bit of hope surged in my heart, and I hurriedly got up from the ground. I asked him anxiously, "Where's Tao Wu? Did you see my wife?" The silver-eyed person bowed. "Father, there's no need to look for her. It's easy to see her. You just have to come back to Fire God Temple half a year later." "Half a year?" "Tell me quickly. The method is simple. From now on, you and that woman can meet once every half a year for 1 day each time. This is the rule of the heavens' will. Originally, breaking through the barrier is already going against the heavens' will. However, everything in the world has a natural counter. Even if the heavens' will is the judge, it won't be so heartless. From this, you will still have a chance to meet that spirit woman. Unless what? Unless you can ascend to become an immortal, then you can change the heavens' will. Ascend to become an immortal. Change the heavens' will. Both the Taoist and Xian sects had the saying of ascending to become an immortal. I naturally understood what it meant. What shocked me was the phrase "change the heavens' will." I vaguely recalled the "change the heaven" that the evil spirit and Tai Sui had mentioned. Could it be that they were talking about changing the heavens' will? But what was the heavens' will? I had always thought that the heavens' will was just a concept, a rule of heaven and earth. However, from the words of the silver-eyed man, even from the evil spirit and Tai Sui, the heavens will seem to be a person. I was silent for a while before I asked the silver-eyed man, "What is the heavens' will? Is it a person?" The silver-eyed man became silent too. After a while, he grinned. "The heavens' will is the heavens' will. It's not wrong to call it a person. However, a person who can control the will of heaven and earth can't be called a person. Perhaps the word God is more suitable to describe him. God." I was shocked again. Even with my current cultivation as a celestial master, in the eyes of a normal person, I could already be called a god. I even knew how strong cultivators with higher realms were. However, in the eyes of a normal person, those powerful and magical techniques might be the methods of a celestial. However, in the eyes of a cultivator, it was just a stronger power. Why did the silver-eyed man use the word God? Was there really a God in this world? If there was it a cultivator with extremely high cultivation, or was it another existence that had surpassed human life? I didn't understand, so I opened my mouth to ask again. The silver-eyed man seemed to know what I was thinking. Without waiting for me to speak, he shook his head and said, "Father, the gods are indescribable. Even I don't know what the heavens' will is. You only need to know that the existence that stands at the top of the world is the heavens' will. He overlooks all living beings and sets all rules. If people want to break free from the rules, they must first see him. The prerequisite for seeing him is to surpass human life and ascend to the heavens. Ascend to become a celestial." I laughed bitterly in my heart. Breaking through to become a celestial master was close at hand, yet far beyond my reach. How could it be easy to ascend to become a celestial? It wasn't just me. I have to pull myself together. I stood up again, sweeping away the dispiritedness I had earlier. In order to be able to meet her, Bayan was willing to give up her 1,000 years of cultivation. What reason did I have to be disheartened? Where there's a will, there's a way out. Even if I knew that it was a dead end, shouldn't a man give it a try for the woman he loved? I clenched my fists tightly. I'll come back in half a year. I won't let Tao Wu down. One day, I'll make the fire god temple change. No one can stop me from being with Bai, and even if it's the heavens, it won't do. The silver-eyed man smiled, knowingly before he bowed, and retreated. Very quickly, the blinding fluorescent light gradually disappeared. The fire god temple in front of me disappeared again, leaving behind only the wilderness of Shenangjia. This time, I didn't look back and left with determination. For Bai, and I couldn't stop cultivating. One day, I'll be able to go against the heavenly Tao and make this world change. After straightening out these things, my heart felt much better. Then, I walked out of the scenic area. I had been here many times and was already familiar with the way. After walking for about an hour, I left the Shenangjia scenic area. After my cultivation had advanced, my body had become tougher than before. My speed was also much faster. Previously, it would have taken me 3 hours to walk, but now, it only took me 1 hour to complete the journey. When I left the scenic area, it was already evening. It was difficult to get a taxi, so I simply stayed in the hotel next to the scenic area for the night. After a comfortable hot bath, I crawled into bed and lay on the bed, thinking about what to do next. I couldn't do anything about avenging my parents for the time being. After all, the deaths of the 18 heavenly masters were all on my head. If I appeared in the capital at this time, I would become the target of public criticism. At that time, even if I summoned my eyes and the snake spirit, it would be difficult to escape unscathed. It wasn't a big deal for me whether the feng shui metaphysics shop would be rebuilt or not. However, Wang Li should be in the shop right now. Zhang Canwen and I had agreed to meet in 2 years. Now that I thought about it, it had been a year. If we didn't solve this problem soon, it would be too late. Moreover, Zhang Canwen was a member of the Metaphysics Society, so I could ask him to help me inquire about Yi Pianpian. After seeing the so-called human-shaped key in the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty, I had a lot of things I wanted to tell Yi Pianpian. I could ask Zhang Canwen to help me inquire about them. At the same time, I could also treat Wang Li's illness. Thinking about this, I made up my mind and fell asleep in a daze. It was a quiet night. The next morning, I got up early and took a bus to the train station to buy a train ticket from Shenangjia to Shenzhen.